Hey everyone, what's up? I hope you're all doing well. Now, do you think an iPhone 7 in 2020 can hold up to the competition and really be a phone you can use every single day? Well, I'm going to answer that question for you today. Let's get straight into it. Now, I had a few preconceptions when it came to starting to use the iPhone 7. I came from a Pixel 2 XL from Google, which is actually a phone released in 2017, which was a year later than the 2016 iPhone 7. And so my first thoughts was, well, you know what, it's probably going to be slower. And I was definitely wrong about the fact that it was going to be slower, because in the real world, even though the processor is statistically benchmarked slower than the Pixel 2 XL, as you can see here, I'm just using that as an example because that's what I came from, and it's a reasonably similar phone, although a bit newer. So you can see here that it actually performs worse. But in the real world, when web browsing, when opening apps, when multitasking even though it has less RAM, by the way, on the side, it just performs better. And I think that is because of Apple's optimization. But even when it's not Apple apps, when it comes to, for example, using web apps such as this workout app I use called Body Evo here, it's just a simple web app. And when I'm on that on my Pixel 2, it just lags and it's really, really slow. But when you are on the iPhone, as you can see here, it's smooth, there's no juttering, there's no lag, which to me is an important thing, because in the end, a phone is a tool. And so for it to just simply work, that is the priority, not what is seen on a benchmark. And another preconception I had was actually that the phone would be too small. And considering that I would call myself a power user, as I use the phone probably more than 4 hours a day, and making a tech YouTube channel here, mainly focused on phones, so I would say that definitely I would have expected myself to want to stay with large screen phones, phablet phones as we used to call them. So I came from the Pixel 2 XL, which was a 5.7 inch screen, had front facing speakers and everything, a bit more of a fancy type phone, OLED screen and everything. Went down to an iPhone 7, LCD screen, 4.7 inches, not actually even 1080p, it's somewhere in between 720 and 1080. But in the end, it's all you need. Like, even if you're watching YouTube, it's not too bad. It's usable, and in the end, I've started to realize that I prefer the minimalistic approach to phones and technology in general, and just getting what you need and that it works well at the lowest price possible. And we will get onto price in a bit regarding the iPhone 7. So moving away from the preconceptions, let's get on to the positives that I had from using the iPhone 7 in my first few weeks using it. So the number one thing I would say is actually the speed and the fluidity of an Apple device, and as I had mentioned before, the way that Apple's optimized their devices to work so well, even if they are older. The next point is actually that I love the camera. Now, you'd be quite surprised at this. If you know about Google phones and have an interest in that, you would know that the Google Pixel 1, 2, 3, 4, and now the 5 actually have great cameras and were often rated as the best cameras of the year. For example, the Pixel 2 XL was considered by most people and most tech YouTubers and tech journalists the best camera of 2017. But in my opinion, yes, it's a great camera, but it's almost too perfect, to the point that the colours are not as natural and it's a bit too sharp. And when looking at things such as film cameras and DSLRs and the way they shoot their pictures, it's often much more natural. And I realised personally that the iPhone 7 is similar to that. Yes, it's maybe not as good colour science, maybe not as good dynamic range and a few other things, but in terms of just the way the photos look and the way that they really do represent reality, to me is the most important. And I think that the iPhone 7 has more Instagrammable photos in a sense, but that is my personal view, and I think cameras are very subjective. But the one thing in the camera that I would say is not subjective is the video quality. So on the iPhone 7, it is just way, way, way better than what I had on the Pixel 2 XL. And it's much more natural video, smoother when panning, and the quality is just great. And you probably, if I was using it right now, it would be fine for YouTube, and the quality would be very reasonable, especially when using studio lighting. So overall, the camera is a great package, and I would not be worried about that in terms of the iPhone 7, other than the fact that they only have one lens. But I personally came from just one lens with the Pixel 2 XL, so you don't have portrait mode, you don't have a zoom lens or an ultra wide. Personally, I love ultra wides, but you are getting an older phone. So that is definitely a drawback. Now, another point that I would say about this phone that is underrated, slightly less so nowadays, but when talking about older phones, it's not really mentioned, and that is the haptic feedback, the haptic motor inside the iPhone 7. So as you can see here, it's not a typical circular vibration motor that you'd find in most phones, which just spin around using magnets, I believe, and it just makes a vibration. This is technology designed by Apple that just makes the feel very realistic. So when you turn the mute switch on, for example, as I can show you here, when I turn the mute switch on and off, I don't know if you might be able to hear this. This is something that you have to feel in person, so go into a shop, and anything from the 6S and up, so the 7 included, have haptic motors, and when you 3D touch on apps, when you turn the mute switch on and off, and just general things throughout the OS and other applications, it feels real and it feels premium is the most important thing to me. When you feel that haptic vibration, you feel like you have a more premium phone. And even though this phone, when it came out, was actually cheaper than the Pixel 2 XL, it feels more premium. And I would say that in pretty much every way of the phone, it does feel more premium. So that is another benefit. Now, another thing relating to the COVID that we have right now, the coronavirus, having a fingerprint sensor is definitely better than Face ID right now, and the speed that you get from a fingerprint sensor is extremely fast. So if I show you here, very fast, very usable, and it feels like a new iPhone, and in some cases it is faster than what you get on newer iPhones nowadays. Now, another thing that you get on this old iPhone that you don't get in the newer versions of this casing, so such as the iPhone SE, it still has the same look as the iPhone 7, with the bezels and everything, you do not get this white colour anymore. It's just not a thing. So personally, I thought I didn't like this white phone. As you can see here, I thought that I didn't like the silver and the white, and I thought it was a bit not necessarily a masculine phone, for example. But when I went ahead and got myself a black case for it, the contrasting look, personally I feel is actually much nicer than if I were to have just a basic black screen on the front, and I think it makes it look a bit different and a bit more personal. But that's, again, a very personal point. I just feel like it's very nice as long as you get yourself a nice contrasting black case. And another interesting point is that I actually love the lightning port. Now, very, very controversial point, I know, because everyone wants phones to move towards USB-C. But personally, I think that having a lightning port is better in the daily use aspect of it. Now, as you can see here, it clicks in a much more sturdy way compared to USB-C ports, which are designed differently. USB-C ports have this inside kind of line in the middle where the plug goes around when it clicks in, whereas lightning ports are just empty and the plug goes into it. Now, for some reason, on lightning ports, they never jiggle around when they're inside. They just sit there and it's very sturdy. Whereas with USB-C, over time, I feel like, at least in most phones, it starts to be a bit more wobbly and not feel as good quality anymore. Now, USB-C is a universal standard and it's probably not going to be changed anytime soon, so it is the way of the future. And after that, it's going to be wireless, or at least through magnets that we will be charging. But I do believe that, at least for now, Lightning is still what Apple is using on the latest iPhone 12. So it is a benefit to me, not only for the fact that it feels more sturdy than USB-C, but also for the fact that you can use so many accessories with it nowadays. Heading on to the negatives, I would say battery life has been the main issue. Now, when I look at the screen on time on my phone, it doesn't look too bad. I'm getting over 4 hours every day, sometimes 5, and that isn't too bad. But then again, when I actually am using the phone, sometimes I'm just a bit shocked that I'm at a low percentage by the end of the day. But then again, my schedule has recently changed and I'm finding it hard to compare to the Pixel 2 XL, but I would say it was better before, and on these smaller iPhones, it's already known that the battery life isn't great, especially if you're going to buy a second-hand one with less than, say, 95 or 97% battery health, which you definitely have to be careful when looking to buy one nowadays. Now, personally, I refurbished this phone myself, so it has an actual higher capacity battery than a normal phone would have, and I made sure it was from a reputable seller, so I've got a higher capacity than normal and iPhone 7 battery, and I'm still finding it a bit iffy. So if you are a very, very heavy user, it might not be the best bet to go and get an iPhone 7 or 8 for that matter, or even a new SE. But it's still very usable, and you do get at least over 4 hours of screen on time, I would say, for the majority of people, if not 5 or 6, depending on your usage. But even though that is screen on time, in terms of standby time, it's amazing. Like, I can go for 2 days straight and lose 1 to maybe 3%, just if I were to leave the phone there. For example, I leave it overnight and I just don't lose any percentage at all, and that's without charging it. So that is definitely a great point relating to that negative of battery life. Say the other negative is actually that I can't use Google Assistant on iOS. You have to use Siri for the majority of tasks, which is fine, but I do find it's not as knowledgeable or responsive in a natural way, and when you ask for it to answer a question, it won't automatically look it up on Google. It will just say, I don't know. You have to ask it to look stuff up on Google. So that's a negative for me. But if you are already an iPhone user and have, say, an iPhone 5S or 6, or even you have a 7 and you're still watching this video, you'll be used to Siri by now and may not even know what Google Assistant is like. So that is most likely not a negative for most people. So overall, I would say the iPhone 7 is a great buy for most people. And considering the fact that it's still smooth and very usable and will most likely get iOS 15, I don't see a reason not to go ahead and buy it if you are in the price range of £150 to £180 and you are cool with the few drawbacks that it does have, and the fact that it does have a bit of a smaller screen, but as you saw, I actually put that in my positives. Although the one thing I would say to be cautious of is, if I were you, I would stay on iOS 13.7. Now, it's too late if you've already upgraded, or if the person you're buying the phone from has already upgraded it to iOS 14. But for now, until the later iterations of 14 are out and we know how much they affect the battery life and performance of the 7, I won't be upgrading to iOS 14. I'll be sticking on iOS 13.7 because speed and performance is still very good there, and I don't necessarily trust Apple's updates on their older devices. And finally, in terms of going ahead and buying your own, if this has convinced you that this is the phone for you, look at the £150 to £180 price bracket, whether or not you're getting 64 gigabytes or 128 gigabytes of storage. Personally, I would say go with 128, because nowadays that is usually the standard for a lot of phones. Still not in some iPhones, but I'd say stick with the 128, that's what I have. And make sure, if I were you, get a refurbished phone from a reputable source. Don't go secondhand unless that's just someone who's refurbished it themselves, or it does have a reasonably high battery health. So there we are. That is my video on whether or not you can use an iPhone 7 in 2020. And as you can see, I personally think the answer is a big yes, and that it's actually something you probably should do if you are in a similar situation to me and don't want to spend too much money on a new phone, but still want a phone that is usable, good, and reasonably minimalistic for 2020. So have a good day, everyone, and I will see you in my next video.